Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. We, of course, are on a special broadcast this morning. It's day 14 of Operation Protective Edge. With me also this morning, thank you, Yossi, is the clinical psychologist at the NATAL Israel Trauma Center for Victims of Terror and War and at the Kamoni Healthcare Social Network, Danny Eger. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us this morning. Trauma is just, just one word that can describe what many in Israel are feeling right now, trauma, shock, and I don't even know the clinical terms, but in terms of the public opinion right now, tense is not even a word to describe what's going on for public opinion, especially, of course, when we hear tragic news such as this.
Yes, you're right. Obviously, everybody is tense, and everybody is anxious, or I don't know if everybody, many of us are anxious. Some are more anxious, and they need some help, and we are here to help them. These people usually are traumatized in the past, and in such situations, the whole circle of their own trauma is reawakened, and they experienced everything all over again. And there are others whose anxiety is so severe that they find it difficult to function, and that's where they need help.
And what kind of help can be given? I mean, we have to differentiate. People now in Tel Aviv who've just now had another code siren alert, of course, that is one side of the anxiousness and the trauma, whereas people in the south who've lived through it and have grown up through it, children who have, for the past more than a decade, it's been their way of life. Is there a difference? Can these two situations even be compared?
Yes, they can be compared, but they are different. They're different. The duration, obviously, is a factor, because if it happens over and over again and again, day after day for years, then it's more difficult. But there is something that we can do. First of all, we must follow the directions of the Home Front Command. Why? Because first it saves lives, and then it also saves our mental functioning in that we do something. Being passive is a risk factor, and when we're passive, we'll get more anxious and we're more traumatized. If we do something, we're active, then we're less at risk. And that's the first thing we must do. The second thing we must do is that we must lower our anxiety as much as possible. I recommend that everybody go into the website of NATAL or Kamoni or others who have very specific guides as to what to do. And usually what that thing is to release some of the tension of the anxiety in the body, because anxiety remains in the mind but also in the body. And if that doesn't work, call for help.
Long-term effects of this are, of course, known and present in the clinical community. Can they be seen also within civilians? Can I see it on someone else? For instance, I don't have any clinical, of course, background. And can I identify symptoms and so forth in the long term as well?
I think the major symptom that you might find in others is that something in their regular functioning is not working anymore. They can't function in work. They can't function as a husband or a wife or as a parent. Something like that. We're
going to break for 2 minutes. We will be back after this break. Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition, which is a special broadcast this morning, of course, day 15 of Operation Protective Edge. Here in Tel Aviv, we just had a code red and a few rockets, some which were intercepted above the city. We are hearing some mixed reports of shrapnel hitting some houses and inside of the city. We will be confirming those reports as soon as we can. Still with me in studio is the clinical psychologist at NATAL Israeli Trauma Center for Victims of Terror and War, and at the Kamoni Healthcare Social Network, the Terror and War Trauma Community, Danny Eger. Thank you for staying with us. So can we hear a little bit about the Kamoni Healthcare Social Network? Obviously, there's so many different networks in Israel. One can say because of the history of the conflict and the history and the nature of the conflict, that maybe sometimes one will say, arguably, that there's so many hands trying to fix a very big problem.
Yeah, well, when you have two Israelis, you have three opinions.
Right.
So Well, the Communius network is quite unique in that the entire social network is dedicated to health issues. So you have communities which are designated by the illness. So you'd have a community for Crohn's disease, a community for cancer, a community for anxiety, and then there's a community which I'm there, which is called War and Terror Trauma. You know, and we specialize in having people speak about those issues in their lives. And it's a unique way to speak because online communities speak in an asynchronous way. You know, like now we speak in a synchronous way. You know, we're both here when we speak. But when you're on an online social network, you can write something and then go about your business, and then somebody else writes, and then you return a few hours later, and then you continue the conversations later, right? So it helps a lot of people, and traumatized people and anxious people sometimes find it more easy to speak from the safety of their own home. You know, so it gives another channel for people to express themselves, which is very important. One of the main things is not to be alone when you're anxious, when you're terrified.
Is it easy to express yourself when you're anxious and terrified? And in what way can you express yourself that perhaps, you know, as you said, when you talk to someone who's gone through similar circumstances, what is it that helps, besides having that same parallel? What do they talk about that will help them eventually?
First of all, they talk about how they feel. You know, and they share it, and they see that others feel the same as they do. You know, and then they can get some advice, what other people are doing. And they can get some professional advice from people like me. And just the mere fact that they say it, you know, that they do not remain alone with it, it already is a big help. It's already a step forward.
Indeed, and this is something that, of course, each operation, we say, brings more and more victims of trauma and so forth.
That is correct, but for the great majority, it's over. Within a few days or weeks, it's over. For very few, it remains a bigger issue for months.
But in all seriousness now, the psychological warfare that we've been seeing, and we've been seeing it also sent, you know, Minister Erdogan, Gilad Erdogan got a SMS message with very, very graphic photos of IDF soldiers. The psychological warfare, does it actually work? And when you're dealing with victims of trauma, does it intensify the trauma? Or do we understand that this is just, you know, something made up or made a picture and so forth?
Well, victims of trauma are very sensitive. So if they're already victims of trauma, they're already traumatized, then yes, it doesn't make them worse, you know, or more frightened. But, you know, as Noy said here, you know, sometimes we don't take it really serious all the way, right? It's not, we don't, you know, we have a sense of humor about it. You know? But in general, the entire social networks are unruled, not moderated, and also unruly, you know. So they can be used for incitement, for scaring people, you know, but also for calming people, or for getting people to go to a funeral, like we saw last night, right? Over 10,000 people through social networks went to that funeral of a guy who didn't have a family here.
Right.
You know, it was just, you know, done through social media. So there are also those things. And the thing about psychological warfare, it only works if you really understand the psychology of the other side.
Right.
But usually people speak through their own psychology rather than the psychology of the other person.
So they know
because it's very difficult to really understand another person, you know, or it's another culture.